What's up, guys? This is Mark Denker here from Y Delta, and today we're talking about building from scratch versus building on top of legacy systems. Before we dive in, as usual, make sure to get your free ebook, Software is Feeding the World, is officially free. Put in your email, and we'll send you a PDF or EPUB to your email that you can then download on your Amazon Kindle or other e-readers that you might use. All right, with the promo out of the way, let's dive in. And by the way, before we talk about the pros and cons between building from scratch and building on top, you might also be interested in another article that we wrote, The 10 Reasons to Move Away from Legacy Systems. That is kind of overlapping with why you want to build from scratch. So speaking of building from scratch, a lot of organizations, they get stuck in a legacy system. It is crushing innovation left and right to many organizations. A lot of organizations, they have great intentions, right? They want to conquer the world, they want to do good in the world, they want to make a dent in the universe, they have big aspirations. And then reality strikes hard, and especially legacy systems strike hard because their systems that they're currently running on, which was mainly built in the 80s, in the 90s, maybe in the new millennium, in the 2000s. All these systems are they came from a world that is so different compared to the world that we live in today. I mean, today we are wrapped in VR glasses. We are surrounded by different devices that wasn't even imaginable back then. So very often you end up in a scenario where it doesn't make sense to continue maintaining and working on a legacy system. You might as well build from scratch. This is obviously a difficult decision because you have poured in a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort into a system. So it is difficult to decide to make the decision to build from scratch. So before you decide to do that, make sure to read the full article. I'll leave the link below, of course, so you make an educated decision. Another way to deal with your legacy system is to build on top. Today we are blessed with more and more APIs and open APIs where we can talk to systems, both your own systems and others' systems. And that could be your lifeline in terms of your legacy system. Building modern APIs can actually make it possible to build on top of a legacy system. So a legacy system that is built God knows when, back in the 80s, it's running on an old technology, an old programming language, and nobody knows how to code in that language anymore. But what we can do instead of building on top of that system is that we can build an API, and then through the API, a mobile app, a application for a watch or a website or a web shop or what have you, can then talk to the API that then talks to the legacy system. So the communication flow is structured. That doesn't require much programming in old programming language like COBOL or Fortran. That will allow you to work in conventional new technologies that most developers work in today, but still maintain your legacy system and build on top of it. So that's, in a nutshell, the two options that you're left with. There's a 5-step model that we mentioned here in the article, how to decide to build from scratch or build on top. Make sure to go through these 5 steps if you are in a situation where you're considering. We have a pros and cons list that I don't want to go through right now. You can read it yourself if you want to check it out. But something that I do want to highlight is the situation that most organizations find themselves in, and how to manage a situation where you have a legacy system. The system might have been running for 5, 10, 20 years, whatever. This is typically the progression that you will go through. So say you build a system 10 years ago, or even if you just build a system just now, you can expect to be on this trajectory in the time to come. So in the beginning, there is, everybody's happy. There's a new system. Everything is possible. And there's very little technical debt because you just build a system. It's brand new. shiny system. And what happens then is that your maintenance goes up because the system is growing. It's, you need to maintain it. There's more and more complex features. There's new things that you need to be able to do, requested from your finance department or HR or production or whatever it might be. So the system is growing and you need to accommodate for more and more things. The adoption curve is slower for many good reasons. Sometimes financially it doesn't make sense to adopt a new technology right away. Technologies needs to be proven and adopted by users. It took some time, for example, for people to get smartphones. It's difficult to be the first always, and very costly typically. So it makes a lot of sense that the adoption curve is not as fast as it could have been. But what happens is that with higher and higher maintenance cost of your system, because the system is getting bloated and more complex, maybe even developers, if it's a very, very old system, it's hard to find developers that can code in the programming language. And what that basically means is that the supply of these developers are low, but the demand is typically quite high. So therefore, the cost of these developers and therefore the cost of maintaining a system that is built in this programming language is very high. So technical debt keeps going up, and the first step that you go into is that you refactor code. So refactoring is basically removing blocks of code that turned out not to be necessary. Oftentimes when you build systems, you get smarter as you go along and you realize, oh, we didn't need this, we could have done this smarter. This is a classic situation that you find yourself in when you build systems. So refactoring code is a classic example of what you would face as a first step when your system grows and has more and more years in the market and in production. You start to refactor. Then at some point you find yourself in a situation where you either migrate or you transform the code. So you either, as we mentioned in this article, you either build from scratch or you are building on top with an API, for example. And then you either modernize or replace / eliminate completely. As the technical debt grows, this becomes more and more relevant to you to completely build from scratch. The problem that many organizations, especially big organizations, find themselves in is that they are unable to move away from their current legacy system. A lot of banks, for example, they have old mainframe systems that are, just to give you an idea of how old they are hooked up to an oil tanker in case there is an outage, an electricity blackout. The system needs to keep running, people need to be able to transact. So they have an oil tanker attached to their mainframe system to keep generating energy so the system keeps running. That just gives you an idea of how old some of these systems are, and it's not just in finance, you can find that in other organizations and big industries. And because they have compliance and regulation that they need to abide to, there's oftentimes in these large organizations good reasons why they can't move away from their legacy system. And that just means their technical debt becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. It's becoming harder and harder to innovate. And this is a pickle. This is really, really difficult. You see that in finance for sure, but you see that in other industries as well, where technical debt is just exploding. We talk more about that actually in the other article, 10 Reasons to Move Away from Legacy Systems, which you might be interested in. So this is for any system, this is the trajectory that you're on. This is what you can expect. Obviously, if you find yourself unable to cope with all these changes and a system that is just becoming more and more complex, do feel free to contact YDelta. We are here. And in the meantime, if you have some extra time and energy that you can use to educate yourself on these systems, again, don't hesitate to drop your email to get a free ebook. Software is Feeding the World is out there. So until then, thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you for the next one.